From the moment I was old enough to understand what a family photo meant, I always felt something was off about the ones hanging on our walls. I would stare at those framed memories, birthdays, family trips, school events, and a strange heaviness would settle in my chest. Everyone smiled. Everyone looked happy. Everyone belonged. And yet, whenever I tried to find myself in those pictures, there was always the same strange mark, the same cruel reminder that I was never really seen as part of them. My name was scratched out, blurred, or replaced with a single harsh word: the mistake. I didn't know whether it was a joke, a warning, or a message, but it became the shadow that followed me through childhood. It shaped my confidence, my place in the house, and the way I learned to see myself long before the world ever knew my real name. Growing up in a home where love felt like a privilege and acceptance came with conditions, I learned to stay quiet. I learned to shrink myself. But even in silence, I watched everything. I watched my siblings enjoy the warmth I didn't get, the gentle calls by name, the proud smiles during school events. I watched my mother act like I was invisible unless she needed someone to blame. I watched my father avoid my eyes like I was something he never meant to bring into the world. And every time I walked past a family photo, that ugly replacement name screamed louder than any insult could. The mistake. It was like they wanted to erase me without actually removing me, like they wanted the world to know I existed, but not in the way a child should. Not as family. Not as a daughter. I remember one day in particular when I was around 10 years old. My aunt visited from out of town, and she stood in front of the living room wall, staring at one of the framed pictures from my first birthday. I had a tiny smile, cake smashed on my face, and eyes full of innocence. But under the picture, where my name should have been printed, someone had scribbled over it with a thick black marker. My aunt's eyebrows pulled together. "Whose birthday is this?" she asked. My mother laughed, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Just the little mistake," she said. My aunt didn't laugh. She looked at me with a sadness that I didn't understand at the time. It was the first moment I realized that not every adult agreed with the treatment I received. But no one spoke up. No one changed anything. School was my escape, even though I never fully fit in there either. When I raised my hand too much, teachers said I was trying too hard. When I stayed quiet, they said I wasn't trying enough. I lived in a space where nothing I did felt right, and no matter how hard I worked, my achievements were never celebrated at home. Grades, awards, talents, everything that could have brought pride to a normal family went unnoticed in mine. But something inside me refused to stop trying, even when the house I lived in made me feel like I wasn't supposed to exist. It was like some small spark inside me kept whispering that maybe I could be more than what they called me. As I got older, I started paying attention to the way people reacted to me outside my home. Teachers praised my writing. A neighbor complimented my singing. A coach once told me I had the kind of determination that could take someone far. For the first time, I realized that not everyone saw me as the mistake. Some people saw potential. Some saw talent. And some saw a girl who was trying, really trying, to find a place in a world that felt too big and too unkind. But every time I walked back into that house, the spark dimmed. The photos on the wall reminded me of the label they chose for me. My siblings would joke about it sometimes, thinking I didn't hear them whispering, "Why is she even in the pictures? They should have cropped her out. It looks better when her name isn't there." Their voices echoed through the hallways, mixing with dishwasher sounds and TV noise, becoming part of the environment, like it was something normal. I pretended it didn't hurt. I pretended it didn't faze me. I pretended I couldn't hear. But the truth is, it carved wounds I carried for years. One day when I was around 16, everything shifted. I was cleaning out the storage room because my mother said she needed space. While digging through old boxes, I found a dusty album tucked away behind holiday decorations. It was filled with original versions of the family photos, before someone edited or marked them. And there I was. Me with my real name neatly written under every single picture. My real smile untouched. My father's hand resting on my shoulder. My mother holding me like she once cared. My siblings laughing with me instead of at me. It didn't make sense at first. Why would they hide these photos? Why replace my name with something so cruel? What changed? When did it change? As I turned the pages, I saw more. Not just pictures but notes, receipts, small memories that suggested I used to be loved. That I wasn't always unwanted. Something must have happened, something no one ever told me, something buried deeper than the ink that erased my name. That night, I asked my mother about the album. She froze, like I had opened a door she never wanted anyone to find. She told me to forget it. She said it was old, meaningless, not important. But her face told a different story, her eyes held fear. And fear always means there's something to hide. That was the moment I made a silent promise to myself. If they spent years trying to erase me, then I would build a life too big for them to ignore. If they didn't want my name on the wall, then one day the world would put it in lights. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew I would prove that the mistake wasn't a mistake at all. I didn't know that this promise would lead me straight into the world of fame, into a journey that would change everything, not just for me but for the same family that tried to erase me. Because life has a funny way of turning things around, and sometimes the person you underestimate becomes the one everyone talks about. But the truth behind why they replaced my name, that part is something I didn't discover until much later. And when I finally learned the reason, it changed everything. It changed the way I saw them. It changed the way I saw myself. And it changed the story of how I went from being the mistake to becoming the celebrity they never expected. And the secret behind those photos? The one thing they never wanted me to find out? That's where everything really begins. The night I found that hidden photo album, I barely slept. I kept replaying the images in my mind, my name written clearly, proudly, under every picture. My parents smiling at me like I belonged. My siblings holding on to me like I mattered. It didn't match the life I knew, the coldness I grew up in, the silent rule that I was someone who should have never been born. Nothing made sense, and the more I thought about it, the heavier the confusion felt in my chest. By morning, I was sure of only one thing. The past held answers my family didn't want me to see. And that meant I needed to look deeper. The next few days, I paid close attention to everyone in the house. Things I had never noticed before suddenly felt important. My mother kept avoiding eye contact, especially when I walked into the room unexpectedly. My father became quieter, leaving earlier for work and coming home long after dinner. My siblings watched me with a strange, cautious look, like they sensed something had shifted but couldn't figure out what. The atmosphere felt tense, as if one wrong question could make the whole house crack open. At school I tried to stay focused, but the thought of those untouched photos kept distracting me. My best friend Lila noticed the way I kept zoning out. She had always been the only person I trusted enough to share small pieces of my life with. She knew my house wasn't a warm place, but even she didn't know how deep the rejection went. I never told her about the scratched out names or the label, the mistake. I didn't want anyone to look at me with pity. But that day she forced me to talk. "You're acting like someone just told you the world is ending," she said quietly during lunch. I tried to laugh it off, but Lila had a way of seeing right through the walls I built. So I told her about the album, not everything but enough for her to understand why I couldn't get it out of my head. She frowned. "Families don't erase kids from photos for no reason," she said. Something must have happened. Her words echoed in my mind. Something must have happened. But what? And why was everyone pretending like the past didn't exist? That night when I got home, the album was gone. The spot where I left it, hidden behind a stack of old newspapers, was empty. I searched the whole storage room, then the living room, then my parents' room when they weren't home. Nothing. It was as if the book had vanished. Or worse, someone took it because they knew I had seen it. Panic twisted in my stomach. I felt exposed, like I had stepped somewhere I wasn't supposed to. And then came the fear. If they were hiding something big enough to remove the whole album, what would they do if they knew I was still searching? The next morning at breakfast, my mother acted unusually calm. Too calm. She asked, "Did you finish cleaning the storage room?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were cold, calculating. I nodded, pretending I didn't notice anything strange. My father didn't look up once. My siblings whispered quietly to each other. It felt like everyone knew something except me. For the rest of the week, I walked around with the feeling of being watched. Someone had definitely moved the album, but no one mentioned it. It made me feel like I wasn't just forgotten anymore. I was a threat. A threat to whatever they were trying to hide. I tried to search the house again, but every door felt heavier, every drawer louder, every step riskier. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might catch me if I pushed too far. So I stopped looking for the album and started looking at the people instead. My mother was the first one who started acting differently. She suddenly became strict about where I went, what time I came home, even who I talked to. She asked too many questions about my day, my friends, my teachers, things she had never cared about before. It felt like she was trying to track my every move. My father, on the other hand, became distant in a way that felt intentional. He avoided rooms I entered. He kept conversations short. Once, when I quietly walked into the kitchen, he flinched like he didn't expect me to be there. I caught a glimpse of his face, the guilt, the fear, and for the first time I wondered if he regretted something from the past. Something connected to me. My siblings were the strangest. They stopped making jokes about me. They no longer said the word mistake. Instead, they watched me with wide eyes like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. One night, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. She wasn't supposed to see it. What if she tells someone? She won't. She doesn't know anything yet. That word, yet, sent chills through me. What did they think I was going to find? The more days passed, the more determined I became. If my family had spent years hiding something, then it had to be big. And if it was big enough to rewrite my whole identity, I needed to know the truth. The turning point came from someone I least expected, my grandmother. She lived 2 towns over and rarely visited. But one Sunday, completely out of the blue, she showed up at our door. My mother's face dropped instantly, like she had seen a ghost. My grandmother hugged everyone except my mother. Then she hugged me, tight, warm, and long enough for me to feel like she was trying to say something without words. As we sat down for tea, my grandmother kept glancing at me, her expression full of something heavy. When my mother stepped into the kitchen, she leaned closer and said quietly, "You look like her more every day." I froze. Like who? Before she could answer, my mother returned, and the conversation snapped shut. But my grandmother's words stayed in my mind like a riddle. Who was her? And why did it feel like saying the name would open a door none of them wanted opened? Later that evening, as my grandmother was leaving, she held my hand firmly and whispered, "One day they won't be able to hide it anymore. Keep your heart steady. Keep your heart steady." She said it like she knew the truth would break something inside me. That night, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering whose face I really carried. Because if I looked like someone they didn't want to talk about, maybe that was the real reason they erased me. Maybe the mistake they wrote under my pictures wasn't about my existence, but about what my existence reminded them of. I didn't know it yet, but the truth was tied to a story buried long before I was old enough to understand anything. A story about secrets, choices, and one moment that changed the entire direction of my life. And as the pieces slowly started falling into place, I realized something even more unsettling. The people who raised me weren't just hiding a truth. They were hiding from it. And the deeper I looked, the darker the past became. The real story, the one they spent my whole life running from, was about to reveal itself. From that moment on, I couldn't stop thinking about the past. Every detail of my childhood, the erased names, the whispered jokes, the cold silences, began to feel like puzzle pieces I had to fit together. I started noticing patterns I had never paid attention to before. The way my mother avoided old photographs, the way my father suddenly became anxious when certain relatives were mentioned, the way my siblings looked at me with a mix of fear and guilt. It was as if my entire family was moving around a secret that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with something buried in history. I decided to start small. I went back to the places from my early childhood, the park where I had my first birthday party, the school where I got my first award, even the old community center where my family used to attend events together. Each place carried a memory, a shadow of the life I should have been a part of. But what I discovered was strange. Some of the people I once knew had no recollection of me, or they referred to me vaguely as if I had never belonged. It was like the world outside my house had already erased me in subtle ways. And yet, something in their tone, a pause, a hesitation, suggested that they remembered, they just weren't allowed to say it. School became a double-edged sword. Teachers who had praised me began asking questions, small ones that seemed innocent but felt pointed. "Are you staying out of trouble at home?" one teacher asked with a knowing look. I could sense that even outside my house, whispers followed me. Lila, my best friend, tried to keep me grounded, but I saw the worry in her eyes. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how to break through the invisible wall my family had built around me. Meanwhile, my grandmother's words haunted me constantly. "One day they won't be able to hide it anymore. Keep your heart steady." I started piecing together what she might have meant. Maybe my existence was tied to something my parents, or even my grandparents, had tried to bury. Maybe I wasn't just a mistake in the casual, cruel sense. Maybe I was a reminder of something far bigger. I started digging through the family archives in secret. Old letters, faded photographs, handwritten notes, all hidden away in drawers, boxes, and dusty cabinets. I found documents that mentioned me indirectly, letters from my father to his siblings that I had never known existed. He wrote about problems and complications that needed careful handling, but he never explained what they were. My mother's notes were even stranger, pages of dates, names, and cryptic phrases that made no sense to me. The deeper I looked, the more I realized that the story wasn't just about me being erased, it was about my family trying to control a narrative, to hide a chapter of their own lives that they were ashamed of. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the tension with my siblings. They were no longer openly cruel, but there was a new type of hostility that I couldn't shake. Whispered comments in hallways, doors closing quietly when I approached, Small items disappearing from my room, they weren't overt, but they were enough to make me realize they were watching me just as closely as I was watching them. There was fear in their eyes, but also resentment. Resentment that I had started noticing things they thought I would never uncover. One evening, my father came home later than usual. I saw him standing in the living room, staring at the wall where the family photos hung. His hand hovered over the frame where my name had been replaced with "the mistake." For the first time, I noticed something in his expression that I had never seen before: regret, sorrow, and something else, something darker, like fear of the truth finally catching up. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but I hesitated. The tension in the room was thick, almost unbearable, like the air itself was waiting for a confession that might never come. Meanwhile, my mother began controlling my daily life more and more. She questioned who I met, where I went, and even what I wore, as if my choices could somehow reveal the secret she had spent years burying. Her fear was palpable, and I realized that the family's erasure of me wasn't just cruelty, it was desperation. They weren't just hiding my identity, they were hiding themselves from something I had no idea about yet. The conflict became even more complicated when I started receiving messages from distant relatives I barely knew. One uncle, whose voice I remembered from childhood gatherings, sent me a short note: "Don't dig too deep. Some things are better left buried." That message, coming from someone outside the immediate household, made my heart pound. Whoever knew about this secret was still alive, and they were watching. It made me question how many people had been part of this story all along, and what they were afraid would happen if the truth came out. I also started noticing small signs in public, things that seemed coincidental at first but later felt like warnings. Strangers who seemed to recognize me, odd looks from family friends, news articles about people connected to my parents that didn't make sense. The more I learned, the more it became clear that the label "the mistake" wasn't just a childish insult. It was a symbol of a story my family didn't want anyone to remember. And the scar it left on me wasn't just emotional, it was part of a bigger puzzle, one that involved power, shame, and long-held secrets that could shake everything I thought I knew about my life. As I tried to process all of this, I began to realize that my own identity, the name, the person, the life I had been living, wasn't entirely my own. It had been shaped by the way my family tried to erase me. And the more I searched, the more I understood that to reclaim who I was, I would have to confront them all, dig into their past, and challenge every lie I had been told. But even as I made that decision, I knew something else. I wasn't the only one in this story. My siblings, my parents, even my grandmother, everyone had their own secrets, fears, and motivations. And uncovering mine would inevitably force them to confront theirs. The tension was reaching a breaking point, and I could feel the moment coming when nothing would be able to stay hidden anymore. By now, I had become obsessed with one question. Why did they replace my name with "the mistake"? Was it because of something I had done, or something I represented? And as I stared at the wall of photos that had haunted me for years, I realized that the answer wasn't just going to appear on its own. I had to follow the trail, no matter where it led, no matter how painful it became. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I could hear the house breathing around me, the creaks in the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whisper of memories that refused to die. Somewhere in that silence, I knew the truth was waiting. And I knew that once I found it, nothing would ever be the same. But I didn't yet know that finding it would force me into a world I wasn't prepared for. A world where family loyalty, love, betrayal, and fame would collide in ways I could never imagine. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the secret behind my erased name wasn't just about the past. It was about a future my family desperately wanted to keep from me, and that the world would soon see in a very different way. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm I couldn't escape. Every glance from my family, every whispered conversation I caught in the hallway, every silent judgment from neighbors or distant relatives, it all began to feel like a countdown. Something was about to happen, though I didn't yet know what. I could feel it in my bones. The tension in the house had reached a point where one wrong move could break everything open. I started keeping a small notebook, writing down everything I noticed. Small inconsistencies in stories, the sudden changes in behavior, the moments my siblings froze when my name came up. I recorded dates, conversations, and strange occurrences. Every piece of information felt like a key, a tiny thread that might lead me to the truth. And every day, the threads tangled more, wrapping tighter around the secrets my family had tried so hard to hide. One evening, my father came home unusually early. I had been sitting in the living room, pretending to read, but my heart was racing as I noticed him pause by the photo wall. He traced his finger over the spot where my name had once been, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. You shouldn't be looking into things you don't understand. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something in his tone suggested fear more than anger, and it made my mind race with questions. Fear of what? Of me? Or of what I might discover? The house suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, as if walls themselves were closing in to keep me from learning the truth. My siblings, too, started behaving differently. They no longer hid their looks of worry, though they still didn't speak. I could see the conflict in their eyes, the desire to protect their own positions in the family and the realization that I was no longer a child who could be ignored. One night, I overheard them arguing quietly in the kitchen. "She's too close," my oldest brother whispered. "If she finds out, everything falls apart." "She deserves to know," my sister said softly. "But how do we stop her without making it worse?" Those words sank into me like stones. I realized that whatever was hidden, it affected more than just me. My family's entire world, their pride, their reputation, even their relationships with each other, depended on keeping this secret buried. And the fact that I had started noticing things, asking questions, and following the trail meant I was walking straight into a storm they couldn't control. Around the same time, my grandmother returned unexpectedly again. She didn't bring warmth this time, only a warning. "Some doors once opened can't be closed," she said, her eyes scanning my face like she was measuring my courage. "Be careful. Curiosity is a dangerous thing when people have spent a lifetime hiding the truth." Her words didn't stop me, they only made me more determined. I realized that uncovering the truth wasn't just about understanding my childhood or reclaiming my name. It was about exposing the fear and shame that had kept my family trapped in a web of lies. And I knew that the closer I got, the more volatile everything around me would become. Strange things began happening in the house. Items in my room were moved, notes I had written disappeared, and sometimes I caught shadows of someone watching me from across the hallway. I wasn't sure if it was paranoia or if my family had become desperate to keep me from finding answers. The air was electric, filled with silent warnings, each day heavier than the last. At school too, I noticed a subtle shift. Teachers who had been supportive started acting distant, and classmates who were normally indifferent began staring at me, whispering behind their hands. Lila noticed the change immediately. "You're on the edge of something," she said, gripping my arm. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself. But be careful. People are scared, and scared people can do dangerous things." Her words made me pause, but I couldn't stop. I started piecing together fragments from my family's past. Old letters, faint memories from childhood, and conversations I'd overheard. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. A conflict, a mistake, a moment that had changed everything. Something that my parents, my siblings, and even my extended family had spent years covering up. Then came the night I found the envelope. Hidden behind a loose panel in my room, it contained a letter addressed to me, written in my mother's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter didn't answer all my questions, but it confirmed my worst fears. There was a moment in the past my family wanted erased, and I was at the center of it. Whether by accident, by circumstance, or by choice they hadn't explained. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, holding the letter, listening to the house breathe around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the trees outside, felt like a warning. I knew I was close. Too close. And that knowledge made my stomach churn with anticipation and fear. Over the next few days, tension in the house became unbearable. My parents no longer hid their anxiety. My siblings avoided me entirely, retreating to their rooms, speaking in low tones whenever I was near. Even my grandmother seemed restless, pacing quietly during her rare visits. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to erupt. One evening, I found my father in the garage, surrounded by boxes of old belongings. He didn't notice me at first, but when he did, he froze. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice tighter than ever. "I need answers," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "I need to know why you erased my name, why you replaced it with the mistake, and what you've been hiding from me all these years." He stepped back, a mixture of fear, anger, and something else I couldn't place flickering across his face. "You're not ready," he said, almost pleading. "Some truths aren't meant to be uncovered." But I knew the truth had a way of surfacing no matter how carefully it was hidden. I had seen the threads, I had followed the signs, and I had pieced together more than I should have. Whatever my family had been protecting, I was on the edge of discovering it. And I sensed that once it was revealed, nothing could stop the cascade of consequences, both for them and for me. That night, as I lay awake, the fear and anticipation collided inside me. I knew that in the coming days, everything would come to a head. Questions I had been too afraid to ask would demand answers. Secrets that had been carefully buried for decades would claw their way into the light. And the family that had tried to erase me, to hide the past, would have to confront the reality of what their actions had created. The storm was coming. And I was standing right in the middle of it, ready to face whatever awaited, even if it shattered the life I thought I knew. But the final truth, the full story behind my name, my label, and the reason I had been called the mistake, was still out of reach. And I knew that when it came, it wouldn't just change my life. It would change everything about the people I once called family, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up to a house that felt different, heavier, quieter, almost as if it were holding its breath. Something had shifted overnight, though I couldn't yet put my finger on it. I noticed my mother pacing in the kitchen, her movements sharp and precise, like she was trying to prepare herself for a storm she couldn't control. My father was unusually tense, sitting at the dining table with his hands clenched, staring at the same old photographs that had haunted me for years. And my siblings, they avoided looking at me at all, moving around like I was a silent threat rather than a sister. I tried to shake the unease off, telling myself that it was just tension building toward the confrontation I knew was coming. But then as I went to my room, I noticed something on my desk, an envelope I hadn't seen before. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't addressed to me in my mother's neat handwriting, or my father's cautious scrawl. This one had my full name written in a bold, unfamiliar hand, and inside, a single sentence chilled me to the core. You've been looking in the wrong place. The real story isn't about your name, it's about who you were born to protect. I froze. Protect? What could that mean? My mind raced through possibilities, each one stranger than the last. Could it be connected to something in the past, some hidden family conflict or secret that I had never even suspected? Or was it something else entirely, something that I had never imagined? The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the weight of the words pressed on me. Whoever had sent this knew something I didn't, and they wanted me to follow the trail. I immediately tried to question my siblings, but as soon as I brought it up, their expressions hardened. My oldest brother's jaw tightened, my sister looked like she might cry, and the usual calm of our family home dissolved into an uncomfortable silence. They refused to answer, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had stepped into a part of my family's history that had been locked away for decades. The following days, I began noticing more strange signs that nothing in my house was as it seemed. Doors I knew were always locked were suddenly open. Old family albums that had been tucked away now seemed to have been moved. And worst of all, I started receiving text messages on my phone from an unknown number. Short, cryptic lines, "They're watching. Don't trust what you see." At first, I thought I was imagining it or that someone was playing a cruel joke. But then came the second twist that changed everything. A video arrived. Grainy, shaky footage of my parents arguing in the living room years ago, their faces distorted with anger and fear. In the background, I could hear someone whispering my name, a voice I didn't recognize. And then, my mother's hand moving toward the photo frame, the same one where my name had been replaced with the mistake. The camera angle shifted, and I realized the person recording had been hiding in the shadows all along. My heart raced. Who could have recorded this? And why? The footage didn't just confirm my suspicions. It suggested that there were others, people outside of my immediate family, who had been involved in whatever secret my family had been trying to bury. It was no longer just about erased names or hidden albums. The scope was bigger and the danger was real. I confronted my grandmother during her next visit, hoping she might offer some clarity. Her face fell when I showed her the video. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There are things in this family that were never meant for anyone to uncover. Your parents, your siblings, they've been protecting you from something far worse than you realize." "Protecting me from what?" I demanded, my voice shaking but resolute. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back at me, and she shook her head. "Some truths are dangerous, and the more you dig, the more you put yourself at risk. What you've found, it's only the beginning. If you go further, you'll see just how deep the lies run, and you may not like what you discover about the people you call family." For the first time, the house that had always felt suffocating began to feel like a maze filled with hidden traps. Every glance, every word, every gesture carried layers of meaning I hadn't noticed before. I realized that uncovering my erased identity and understanding why I had been called the mistake was just the surface. The real conflict, the one that could change everything, was far more complex. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the video, the cryptic message, and my grandmother's warning in my mind. Someone had deliberately hidden the truth from me, someone had gone to great lengths to erase my identity, and now someone, or perhaps everyone, was trying to control the moment I finally discovered it. I began to see the connections. My father's coldness, my mother's controlling behavior, my siblings' fear, all of it pointed to one central idea. The secret wasn't just about the past. It was about something in the present, something they were trying to protect, something that involved me directly. And the words in that envelope, "You were born to protect," kept echoing in my mind. Protect whom? From what? And why had no one ever told me? I felt the first real surge of fear mixed with determination. The storm I had sensed for weeks was no longer a feeling, it was real. The tension in the house had escalated to a point where every movement could trigger an explosion. I knew that the answers I sought were close, but so were the risks. And as the shadows of the past began colliding with the present, I realized that the next step I took would change everything, for me and for my family. The hidden truth, the erased name, the mysterious messages, the video, it all pointed to one inevitable moment, a confrontation where nothing would remain hidden. But I also knew that when that moment came, it wouldn't just be a revelation. It would be a reckoning. And I couldn't turn back, not now. Every step I had taken, every observation, every secret I had uncovered, had led me to the edge. The house that had been my prison, the family that had tried to erase me, and the mystery that had haunted my life were all converging. I was about to face the point of no return. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of my own home, I sensed that someone was waiting for me to make the next move, ready to either stop me or force the truth into the open, whether I was ready for it or not. The storm was here and the countdown had begun. The night everything came to a head started like any other, but I could feel the tension in the house vibrating in the walls. My father was unusually quiet, sitting in the living room with his head in his hands. My mother paced like a predator waiting for prey, and my siblings hovered in corners, exchanging nervous glances. I clutched the envelope I had found days ago, the video still burned into my memory, and I knew this was the moment I couldn't back down. I started with the questions I had carried for years. Why did you replace my name in the family photos? I demanded, my voice steady but loud enough to fill the room. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. My mother's face drained of color, my father's jaw tightened, and my siblings looked ready to bolt. Finally my father spoke, his voice rough, almost breaking. We were trying to protect you, he said, each word heavy. The mistakes we made weren't yours. They were ours. And what happened, what we hid, it wasn't meant for a child to carry. I shook my head. Protect me from what? I've spent my whole life feeling like I didn't belong. Feeling like the mistake. I deserve the truth. My mother's hands shook as she pulled a folder from behind the sofa. Inside were documents, letters, and photographs I had never seen before. It started before you were born, she whispered. There was an accident, a situation that could have destroyed this family. We thought hiding it, erasing the name, keeping it secret, it would shield you. We were wrong. The story unfolded like a dark puzzle. Years ago, before I was born, there had been a tragic incident involving distant relatives. A situation that, if it became public, could have damaged the family's reputation and fractured everything they had built. My mother had been pressured to hide the truth, my father had agreed, and they had projected the guilt and shame onto me, labeling me the mistake without ever explaining why. The album, the erased names, the coldness, they were all attempts to rewrite history, to control a narrative I had no part in creating. My siblings finally spoke. We never understood it either, my sister said, her voice cracking. We just knew we were supposed to stay quiet. And we didn't want you hurt, or worse, for the family to fall apart. Everything made sense, but instead of relief, anger surged. Years of being treated like I didn't matter, years of watching the world around me feel distant and cold, it all had roots in something I had no control over. And yet, as my parents and siblings confessed, I realized the truth carried something unexpected. I wasn't just a victim. I had survived, and surviving had given me power. The climax hit when my grandmother, who had been silent until now, stepped forward with a stack of photographs she had kept hidden for decades. Unlike the edited albums, these showed me as a baby, smiling, loved, and cherished. Underneath each picture, my real name was written proudly. You were never the mistake, she said, her voice firm but kind. You were always meant to be here, to carry forward something we tried too hard to hide. And now the world needs to see who you truly are. But just as I began to feel a sense of closure, the final twist came. Among the photographs was a letter addressed to me, not from my family, but from someone who had been part of the original secret, a distant relative who had always stayed in the shadows. It revealed that the incident from before I was born wasn't just a family scandal. It had been covered up to protect powerful people outside the family. The implications were huge, meaning the story of my erasure wasn't only about my household, it was part of something bigger, something dangerous, something that could reach far beyond the walls of my home. The revelation stunned everyone into silence. I felt a mixture of shock, fear, and a strange sense of triumph. The people who had tried to erase me had underestimated me. Not only had I discovered the truth, but I now held knowledge that could change everything, not just my life but the legacy my family had tried to protect. And in that moment, I realized the truth about the label, the mistake. It wasn't meant to define me, it had been a shield, a way for my parents to cope with fear, guilt, and shame. I had grown up believing I was unworthy, but the reality was far different. I was the one who had survived the lies, the secrecy, and the manipulation. I was the one who could step into the light and reclaim my name. As the room settled into a tense quiet, I looked at my family, my parents, my siblings, my grandmother, and I knew something profound had shifted. Their walls of secrecy had cracked. They had been forced to confront the truth just as I had been forced to uncover it. And yet, even as the revelation brought understanding, the final letter reminded me that the story wasn't over. Outside, the world was waiting for the next chapter. My family's past, the hidden secrets, and the incident that had caused so much pain were now mine to navigate. And for the first time, I understood that my name, my identity, and my story weren't just about surviving, they were about stepping forward, claiming my place, and turning the label of the mistake into something the world would never forget. The climax had resolved the mystery of why my name was erased, but as I held the photographs and the letter, a shiver ran down my spine. The unexpected twist lingered. Some secrets were bigger than my family, and my journey to uncover the full truth and protect myself was only just beginning. The days after the revelations felt surreal. The house, once heavy with tension, now buzzed with a different energy, not completely comfortable but alive in a way it hadn't been for years. My parents, still grappling with guilt and relief, began small gestures toward rebuilding what had been broken. My father, who had always avoided my eyes, now looked at me with a mix of shame and admiration, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. My mother's touch was softer, her apologies more genuine, and even my siblings started talking to me like I belonged. The first step toward healing came when we gathered around the living room one afternoon. I brought out the original photo album I had discovered in the storage room, the one that had been hidden for so long. Together, we flipped through the pages, tracing the memories that had been altered, erased, or rewritten. Each picture was a story, a moment frozen in time, and each one reminded us all of what had been lost, not just to me but to everyone who had lived with secrecy for so long. My siblings admitted their part in keeping quiet, their fear of upsetting the fragile balance at home. They spoke of guilt and confusion, of not understanding the full story but sensing the tension that hung over our family like a shadow. "We didn't know how to help you," my sister said quietly. "We didn't know how to fight the fear that controlled this house. But we want to start now." It was a relief to hear, and I realized that reconciliation wasn't about erasing the past, it was about acknowledging it, understanding it, and choosing to move forward differently. I forgave them, not because their actions were excusable, but because holding on to anger would only trap me in the same cycle my parents had created. My parents, too, finally confessed the entire truth about the incident that had haunted the family long before I was born. The accident had been serious, involving family connections to people who could wield influence and power in ways that were dangerous if exposed. They had been terrified of losing everything and, in their fear, had made choices that unfairly impacted me. It was a bitter truth, but it was also a liberating one. At last, I understood that the mistake had never been about me, it had been a label born out of fear, guilt, and secrecy. In the weeks that followed, I began reclaiming my identity in small but meaningful ways. I replaced the old framed photos on the walls with new ones. Pictures of my family smiling, me included, with my real name written clearly beneath each image. I shared stories with my siblings that we had never spoken about, letting the truth settle between us like a gentle weight. The process wasn't perfect, old habits and old fears didn't disappear overnight, but it was honest, and honesty felt like freedom. The revelation of the letter from the distant relative, the one that hinted at a larger, outside story, remained unresolved, but it no longer held the same power to frighten me. I realized that while the past and its secrets could shape me, they didn't define me. I had the ability to decide how to move forward, how to live authentically, and how to reclaim the narrative that had been stolen from me. The world beyond my family might hold challenges and mysteries, but inside my home, the truth had begun to settle. I also found closure in understanding the impact of the label I had carried for so long. Being called the mistake had shaped me in unexpected ways. It forced me to be resilient, to pay attention to the world, to notice subtle patterns and hidden truths. I had survived because I had no choice but to adapt. And now I could use that strength not as a burden, but as a tool to define my own life. I realized that labels only hold power if you allow them to, and my name, my real name, was mine to claim. One evening, as the sun set and the house glowed in the soft golden light, I sat with my grandmother in the backyard. She had been my quiet guide through the chaos, offering wisdom without interference, letting me find my own path. "You've done what we never thought possible," she said. "You've faced the truth, uncovered secrets, and still held your heart steady. That is how real strength is built." I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my chest. "It wasn't easy," I admitted, "and I don't think any of us will forget what happened. But I finally feel like I can breathe, like I belong here, and that I belong to myself first." My grandmother nodded. "Remember this always, the past will try to shape you, but it doesn't own you. You decide what story the world sees. And sometimes being the one they called the mistake gives you a perspective no one else has." Over the next months, the family began to heal in quiet, imperfect ways. My parents worked on communicating openly, acknowledging mistakes, and letting me grow into my own identity without guilt or judgment. My siblings started treating me as an equal, not just a sister who had been erased. And I, for the first time, felt a sense of belonging that wasn't forced or conditional. I also began documenting my story not out of anger, but out of the need to ensure that future generations would understand the truth. Every memory, every photograph, every confession became part of a narrative that reclaimed my name, my history, and my sense of self. And as I shared it, I realized that my experience could help others who had felt invisible, erased, or unloved. I could turn the pain into something meaningful. Looking back, the hardest lesson was understanding that family isn't always perfect, and love doesn't always come without mistakes. But even through secrecy, fear, and pain, there is always room for healing. Reconciliation isn't forgetting, it's understanding, forgiving, and choosing a path forward that honors truth. The story of my erased name had begun as a tale of shame, secrecy, and confusion. It had threatened to define me in the worst way possible. But by uncovering the truth, confronting the fears, and reclaiming my identity, I transformed it into a story of resilience, self-discovery, and empowerment. I had gone from being the mistake to someone whose life, story, and name mattered, not just to me but to everyone who believed that they could be seen, even when the world tried to erase them. And in the quiet moments when I looked at the walls now filled with real family photos, my name written proudly beneath each one, I understood something essential. The power of identity isn't given, it's taken. The power of truth isn't denied, it's uncovered. And the power of family, even with all its flaws, lies not in perfection but in the ability to face the truth together, however painful it may be. By the end, I had learned to walk through the shadows of my past with courage, and I had discovered that the very thing my family had feared most, the truth about me, was what made me strong. I wasn't a mistake. I was the story, the strength, and the witness to everything that had been hidden. And now, finally, my name belonged to me.